Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Buffalo Startup Week. We are joined by Dr. Irfan Khan, the founder and CEO of Circuit Clinical. He is a cardiologist who has served as a principal investigator on both the therapeutic and device clinical trials for more than a decade. Delivering on his company's mission, Dr. Irfan Khan is passionate about improving access to the equity in clinical trials, increasing community engagement, and fostering the patient experience through education and empowerment. Over the last 6 years, he has overseen Circuit Clinical's growth to more than 2.5 million patients, which involves 30 plus partner locations, including multi-specialty physician practices. He's accountable care organizations and federally qualified health centers. His work at Circuit Clinical has also included the creation of Trial Journey, the first ever ratings and reviews platform for clinical trial participants and people seeking clinical research as a care option. Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan Khan, and we appreciate your time.
Great to be here, Brendan. Thanks for having me. So with that, I'll throw over to some slides and walk into this presentation on the founder mindset. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Terrific. So really excited to be here and have this opportunity. The Buffalo startup ecosystem has been absolutely transformative for Circuit. So anything we can do to be helpful, we're happy to do. I want to be really clear and do some level setting. This talk on the founder mindset is really coming from another friend on the journey, right? Circuit isn't at a liquidity event yet. We haven't proven anything. This is my first startup. So we've had some wins. We've had plenty of lessons along the way, and I'm happy to share some of that in the hopes that it's helpful. At the end of the day, each of you know your company better than anyone else, and the key is really just developing frameworks that help you really exceed expectations when there's a space now with a ton of sort of conventional business wisdom in startup land. So, best case scenario, how this will work is we'll talk a little bit about startups and good and bad failure. I think there's the ultimate goal we all have is to build an amazing company that has major impact, that's an incredible place for people to work and do the best work of their career. My hope and sincere wish for each of you who are thinking about starting companies is that that's exactly where you end up. I will say that on the journey, having a more robust definition of good and bad failure can help you get through the individual day-to-day moments as well. And so we'll talk about that. I'll go over 3 pictures that I think everybody who's thinking about startups should be familiar with. Certainly the venture capitalists who invest in you and who look at your decks will know these images well, and they've thought about the problem very deeply. This is some of the foundational thinking and how startups are different than scaled up companies. In a similar vein, I'll touch on some classic errors in startup thinking and how to avoid them. I've made, I think, every single one of these mistakes. So, it's coming from a place of if any of this is useful and prevents somebody else from making the same errors I've made, that's a good thing. And then, there is a way. There's a how to start up, right? I didn't invent it. This stuff is out there. If you look at Y Combinator's amazing startup school, you can get the wisdom of truly great startup founders sharing exactly what they learned and what the deep structure similarities are. Similarly, so Buffalo's got an incredible and incredibly generous startup ecosystem. So between the team at 43 North, Launch New York, Western New York Impact Fund, there's and a host of others, including Buffalo Angels, Rochester Angels. We've been fortunate enough on our journey to be supported at pretty much every turn by the universities, by Roswell Park. It's really about, are you asking the right questions and really seeking help when you start up? And then I'll roll into kind of the title of this talk, which is the founder mindset. Are there ways of thinking about your challenges, your wins, your losses that provide some advantage? There do seem to be some road rules that can be helpful there, so I'm going to share a few of those. And if we end up with time, we'll go to an Ask Me Anything. And I would say that if I could leave you with nothing else, it should be the idea that entrepreneurship is not about telling people things. It's about learning from them. It's about understanding their problems, and asking questions is the only way to do that. So I am from the school, there are no dumb questions. And so every opportunity you get to meet somebody new in our ecosystem, you should be walking into that opportunity with questions in mind for how you want to understand that person's journey, because there's a lot of similarities across the way. So with that in mind, we will start on this image, where to die on Everest, right? So what you are looking at, I think, is a pretty neat shot of the standard path up Everest, right? And so it's a pretty good metaphor for good and bad failure. So let's assume we all want to build amazing companies that change the world, and some of us will, right? We're lucky enough to live in an ecosystem where we've had our first unicorn with ACV Options. I think there's a bunch of great teams that are on the way too. Squire doesn't look far behind. Our friends over at High Operator, and those are just the 43 North companies. Certainly, Tackle.io is an Andreessen Horowitz-backed startup. So you are living in a town where there are some amazing founders, and all of whom, in my experience, are incredibly generous about sharing information and sharing insights and making other introductions to help you form your thesis, disconfirm your mistakes. We'll talk about that in a second. It's not about asking people, hey, how am I right? It's about asking people, hey, how am I wrong? But this picture really gets to how startups work. So there's good and bad failure. And so I want to, sort of pay homage to George Mallory. Data's pretty clear now that we've found his body on Everest. He is the one who coined the famous mountaineering line when he was asked why he wanted to climb Everest. This is before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. He had said, because it's there. And people look at that kind of flippantly, saying, well, that's kind of a dumb reason to do anything difficult. But candidly, it is actually a pretty good reason to address a challenge that's sweeping and kind of monumental and really ambitious. So Mallory died on Everest. His body was just recently found. A documentary was set out to go ahead and go look for him. And from where he was found, and the fact that his camera wasn't with him, a note wasn't with him, it's pretty clear he summited. He made it up. This is, the 1940s, died on the way back down the mountain, is what seems to be pretty clear from the circumstantial evidence. That's a pretty good failure, in my opinion. One, he was attempting something pretty incredible, right? It had never been done before. It was thought to be an unclimbable mountain. He was using the equipment of the day, but really it was his experience in trying these sorts of things in a sequential way, getting good at working in technical climbs and hills, and then doing mountains. He was well prepared. He was well thought out. His reputation has actually kind of gone through a rethinking. There was a middle window after his death on Everest, and Hillary successfully summited and came back down alive, where Mallory was thought to be kind of a rank amateur and hadn't done a good job. But no, he actually had a lot of the same attributes that great startup founders and great teams have, which is that he was prepared, he was ambitious, he was aimed at something really difficult, but he wasn't scared by it, and he did his homework. And so the proof of that, I think, is found in the fact that he was able to get across the Khumbu ice fall. And so if you look at that second arrow, so I look at George Mallory as somebody who attempted something great, and didn't make it. He died on Everest, so that can't call that a success anyway you look at it, but it's honorable failure. And so while the overall goal is to be wildly successful, I do think that there are good kinds of misses. And I think that if you can be the kind of founder that can understand that and isn't afraid to fail and isn't afraid to make mistakes as long as you're doing ambitious things, that's a key part of the founder mindset. What bad failure looks at is what's happening between base camp down at the bottom of this slide and Camp 1. This is actually where most people die on Everest. It's the Khumbu ice fall. It's a glacier, essentially. Whenever you see those pictures of Everest where people are crossing with these ladders and stuff, that's what they're talking about. Now, the glacier, for all its lethality, people who end up in bad situations there almost always have equipment failure or planning failure. Those are bad failures, right? And I think that applies to startup land as well. They haven't done the homework. They don't understand the variability in climate. They make bad decisions in bad weather, those kinds of things, very tactical things. Good failure is when you execute against your plan and things conspire to make it hard to find a win. All right, that will happen in startup land a lot. Death in the glacier is not so good. That's accidental. It's equipment, it's planning, it's discipline to know when to time things. So I share that with, there are good failures. And if you can be the kind of person who can, when you feel you've done everything you can to set the table and go ahead and attack the market you see, you can't control everything, and you have to have a certain stoic disposition to the fact that there will be things that go wrong. And if you can just keep pushing forward, you'd be amazed at how often that bias to action works in your favor. But when you make mistakes because you can't be bothered to plan, you can't be bothered to build the right team, you can't be bothered to understand what the local conditions are, that leads to things like falling into a crevasse. So, I think that this is the part where I'll show some images around what startup land, what the mythos of being in a startup and being a startup founder is, and what the reality are, right? So I tend to be of the mind that game theory, really does trump linear thinking and lazy thinking. And I'll give you examples of both of those. So linear thinking, I think the first two of these drawings are very common. I thought the third drawing, cultivated success, was so good that I didn't want to, make sure to forget to credit the person who created this. This idea of what we think success is, versus what success actually is, right? And they always show you this crazy squiggle, right? So linear thinking is thinking you'll start, you'll have a bunch of wins, you'll get to an exit, and everything will be great, right? The classic example is probably Facebook, which didn't really need to do a whole lot of capital raising, had massive growth pretty much from the get-go coming out of Harvard and such. But when you look and read the books written about Facebook, you see there was a ton of complexity, a ton of complicated decisions in timing their IPO. So just like everybody else, it's much harder than it ever looks in a 1 hour talk or in a book. But it doesn't look like the thing in the middle. And that's the graphic that's always driven me crazy. Like, there just aren't these moments in businesses where things scale up really quickly and then get set back really quickly and then swoop back down again and loop and loop and loop. Companies, obviously would die if that's what success looked like. And so what I really wanted to share was this picture on the right hand side. I think is really special, and it's what cultivated success looks like. This is a game theory approach to things. The picture would have been perfect if they had drawn one of the circles right at the node where those two paths break off. So in game theory, you would say that you can't control everything. You don't have all the information, and you're going to have to make some guesses as to what's reasonably likely to happen. Colin Powell, the late great American general, famously said that he would never wait to be 100% certain before taking action. That he felt that no good battlefield general could do that. That instead, once you got to about 80% confidence around your ideas, you had to be moving forward at that point already. Otherwise, you were always losing momentum. I think the same thing is true in startups. I think that it's really about understanding what are the probable outcomes and what actions keep most of the good outcomes achievable in play. And so it's a statistical way to think about decision making. It's pretty much how we do everything at Circuit. And for those of you, maybe I could have given a little bit more of an intro on Circuit. We bring clinical trial access to health systems that have never been doing clinical trials before. And we help patients find their way with a platform technology called Trial Journey. So we do a couple of complicated things, some stuff on the digital side, some stuff on the clinical side. And people have always asked me, hey, why don't you guys just pick one or the other? This feels like it's two companies sometimes. And I try to work through and explain what the synergies that we see in our deep structure strategy is that seems to be working for us. And what I tend to point back to is that actually having this integrated value proposition where we create value for patients both digitally and clinically, that gives us a better statistical ability to solve real problems for our partner health systems, our patients, and our clients in pharma as the space evolves. And our space is moving very quickly. It's one of the hottest investor markets there is right now, is clinical trials innovation. And we end up being very well positioned because we have a lot of different games we can play depending on what this particular health system or this particular pharma needs. And the reason for that is that we take this kind of game theory approach to success, which is that we don't pretend to be able to read the future. We just have a set of counterintuitive ideas that we feel strongly about and we're willing to market test. And we'll talk about sort of how to form those ideas and how to be usefully counterintuitive as well. So the third one that's worth sort of thinking about, this is maybe the single best visual for what a startup win or loss looks like. So this is the famous Jeff Moore crossing the chasm graphic, right? And so you start up, you've got this early market that you're going to go after. You've shown something. I mean, if you watch the 43 North finals, we saw some amazing companies up there. Some already clearly are on their way to getting through the chasm. So you start off and you need somebody to think your company is interesting, all right? Those are your innovators. They're willing to give you the meeting. They're willing to play around with it because it gives them something to talk about at innovation conferences. It lets people understand that they are highly engaged, very kind of savvy mavens. And there's a small gap there between getting just enough of them to getting the critical mass of people who they don't want to go first, but they don't need a whole lot of information to get comfortable and try something if they see the upside. So those are the early adopters, right? And so this is what Circuit got pretty good at over the last couple of years on our way into the early majority. The chasm is actually the hardest group to attract is the early majority, because it means that you've figured out how to operate and scale. You've built a sales playbook, you've hired enough really great salespeople, you've simplified the offering in language people can understand, and now you can drive it into the kinds of clients that actually do want to be doing innovative things, because they're smart enough to understand that in any business, in the modern economy, it's innovate or die. And so that's who you're really after. It's the late majority, or the grouchies. They come along once the early majority is basically talking about this everywhere, right? So again, I think startup life in general, and it's one of the things we look for at Circuit when we're hiring. The attitude we like is pragmatic optimism, right? So optimism is the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Things that don't exist could exist. Pragmatism is understanding that it will take longer, it'll cost more, it'll be harder than any of us thought, but it's still worth doing anyways because the rewards are waiting on the other side of the chasm. So I'd like to say that it's taken us, for example, I would say probably 5 years, maybe roughly 2 of really just trying to figure out what is it we do and how do we tell our story. And then the last 3 have been fairly high scale for us. And where we are is, if you think back to that first graphic I showed you of Everest, we are now at Camp 1, Circuit is. And we are across the chasm in this graphic, right? We are now selling into our early majority. But to be clear, we have not won the day yet. We're not ACV, we're not Odoo or any of those companies yet. We're still in the process of learning, of listening, and of scaling into the opportunities in front of us. And so it's a really fun time. So I share all of this with you just in the sense of these were things, if I had known them when I started, would have probably made for a better understanding on my part when we did hit these kind of roadblocks and when we wasted time on clients that were just never going to get there because they are philosophically part of the late majority. They might love what we're doing, but they have no intention of signing a contract until we have a decent penetration into the early majority. So that kind of process of customer discovery, understanding what the problems really are, rather than trying to fit what you've built into the solution and say, oh, this is the solution you're looking for, but to really build things that solve real problems for people is half the mission. And then the other half of the mission is, can you build something that people want, but take it to the right people in the right order? And that's what this graph's all about. So the book is called Crossing the Chasm. It's an absolute must read, in my opinion, for anybody who's starting a company or on a team that's trying to scale. And then this is the last picture I'll show, right? So this is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And I think if you look at startups that do not successfully get across the Khumbu icefall, that die in the crevasse, they never left Mount Stupid. They did climb one mountain. It was just the wrong one. They didn't climb Everest, although they thought they had. They had climbed Mount Stupid. And so the way this works is, we all know what the Nobel Prize is. Scientists, as a joke, created a secondary prize called the Ig Nobel Prizes. And what they did was look for the funniest or weirdest sounding papers published in any given year. And one year it was Dunning and Kruger. These 2 psychologists had done this very interesting study to notice that when you map confidence in a subject matter over actual knowledge and competence, you get this very interesting phenomenon. Without getting political at all, I can tell you this plays itself out every day on cable news on both sides of the aisle. When people who really don't have expertise are absolutely convinced that they know what the right answer is, right? The challenge is it works like this. When you don't know much of anything, think about when you first learned how to hit a baseball or a tennis ball. You've been out there a day or two and suddenly you figured out how to actually get some spin on the thing, how to coordinate your eye and your hand. Suddenly it seemed like you were unstoppable and you had this huge improvement in your skill set. And you begin to think that, oh, I know how to play tennis, or I'm a really great baseball player. You are now at the top of Mount Stupid. And if you don't play again, or you play infrequently with people who are only as good as you, you can stay quite convinced you're a pretty good player. All that has to happen is for you to keep trying to improve, to play against people who are better than you, who disconfirm this idea. And you will end up in the valley of despair. Suddenly, excuse me, everything you're doing will seem like it's not working. And that no matter what lessons you take, you can't seem to get any better. And what's happening is you're processing now lots of information. Your competence is going up, but because there's so much for you to memorize and try to get your body to do, you're bad at all of it right now. Your body needs the muscle memory, it needs the time, it needs all these things before it can coordinate and put them all together. Guitar teachers know this inside out, right? Great guitar teachers are always trying to get students to think in 1-year timelines, not in, hey, I'm struggling with this little movement in my hand. They're like, yeah, that's going to take a certain amount of time for your brain to learn how to do this. And there's no short-circuiting any of that. Learning new languages, same thing. And so you end up in the valley of despair. And this is where a lot of startups die. The team loses confidence in what they built. They lose confidence in each other. Their investors lose confidence in them because leadership no longer has a vision that they believe in. And teams run out of money. They run out of the ability to sell into a space. The only thing that really helps people buy your product is that you believe in it. At the beginning, you have to believe in it. And in the valley of despair, you can lose faith and things go awry. But for the really great teams, and what Dunning and Kruger showed was that expertise is really sticking with it. And as you do that, your confidence begins to build again. And it reaches a level of stability and sustainability. That's that second plateau. And so how long it takes to get there, that's dependent on each person, how complicated the task is at hand, all that sort of stuff. But this phenomenon is hardwired into all of our brains. It's not unique to me or you or anybody else. And so it's worth understanding this about yourself every time you try to learn a new skill set, whether it's learning how to be more punctual, learning how to organize your meetings better, all these things. You're going to be initially thinking you know what's going on, then you're going to do more complicated effort in that space and you're going to feel worse and it's going to shatter your confidence unless you remember, oh, that's actually just the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'll be better in a month. I'll be better in 3 months. I'll be better in 6 months. And that actually leads to a more robust kind of honesty with people about where you sit and an ability to get better faster. So I share this graph with you that this is probably the deepest part of the psychology of founders that they're completely oblivious to. They've kind of heard Dunning-Kruger. So Dunning-Kruger, to finish the story, they won the Ig Nobel Prize that year, and it made them famous, and it made this graph actually quite well known for a couple of years. And so what's happened at the end of this is there's actually a Dunning-Kruger effect about the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you ask people about this, if they've seen something a couple of years ago, they act like they completely understand this phenomenon, where it came from and what it is. But if you start asking questions, you very quickly take people who are on Mount Stupid when it comes to Dunning-Kruger effect and take them into the valley of despair. So I only share that to sort of say that was me, actually. And that's what led me to kind of looking this up more, because it's such an important idea about how you actually get better at things. And so with that said, moving away from the general high level stuff, right? Like understand how to cross the chasm, understand how to think about success, understand the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now I think I can share a few bromides or cliches about this and really share both the cliche and its inverse. I read a wonderful book called Alchemy, which was written by the chairman of Ogilvy, or the vice chair of Ogilvy. It's a wonderful book all about marketing and marketing strategy and building great companies. So really recommend it. He's very funny. It's a great audiobook. And he has one line in there that as soon as I heard it, I realized it was brilliant and I would never forget it. And that's really what exposing yourself to new ideas is all about, is that you might read an entire book and come away with one idea and people be like, well, you just wasted 7 hours of your life. And my point is that actually the idea is so powerful. Now I'll be able to apply it in a whole bunch of different ways over and over and over again. It was actually excellent ROI of my time to encounter that new idea. And the idea he had was, he had given a bunch of examples of this, that in business, and in particular in marketing and in sales, often the opposite of a great idea is also a great idea. So if a letter is out there in the world and it's very, very long, and you're trying to think about how do we improve on this great product, maybe making that email 2 lines instead of a page long is also a great idea. And he gave that very specific example and said, the lesson here is that the opposite of a great idea can also be a great idea. So I want to share the inverse of that sometimes the opposite of a bad idea can also be a bad idea. So in one of the cliches in business that you'll hear a lot from operators, people who are they're really good at building and executing against plans. And so these are typically more process-oriented people, not your classic first person to start the company. It's usually the second person is more like this, that they're very process-oriented. And the old idea is the old bromide in business is that ideas are useless, execution is everything. And I'll share with you that is actually largely true. It is not enough to have a good idea. The ideas that sit at the center of Circuit, we're actually delighted by the fact that 3 other very smart teams around the country, all of which I'm friends with the CEOs who run those companies, they all have similar ideas. We're all usefully differentiated. We believe certain things that are counterintuitive, and those are all different from one another. But there's enough similarity in there to prove that the idea of putting research into non-academic hospitals is not unique, and it's not special by itself. It's all about the execution. How do you actually get the deal flow? How do you get health systems to trust you? That kind of thing. So it is true that ideas, aren't worth all that much. It's about the execution. But I think the opposite is true too. And I wanted to share that thinking that execution is everything and ideas are nonsense, that is also a classic error, because executing well against a terrible idea will get you broke very quickly in Startup Land. And so I guess the idea is that these are both reductio ad absurdum, right? Like we're taking it to the extremes. The balanced message here is that it is really important for people who are very good at vision and conceptual ideas to value the contributions and to seek people onto their leadership team as co-founders who are operationally strong. If you tend to be operationally strong and you've developed a process improvement company, then you want to surround yourself with at least one co-founder who's very good at thinking strategically downfield. And it's really having a sense of mutual respect that I think is the most important thing. And all you have to do is spend time with VCs to understand this, because the first thing they look for in those first 2 or 3 founders is balance. You don't want 4 visionaries, and you certainly don't, you don't want 4 Ringos, but you also don't want 4 Lennons. Like, you need balance on that team. So the next one here is people talk about MVP, and I love talking with young founders who are building great products, and I'm trying to always ask myself, do I see a company here or a really great product? And those are different things, right? And so you'll see people, they've all read or at least they're vaguely familiar with what Y Combinator has to say about this, right? There's a famous line that if you're not embarrassed by your first ship, you're launching too late, right? And so people have taken that to mean that put anything out there in the world, and they have forgotten what Eric Rice was getting at in the lean startup, which is that there's also V, right? And V might have changed from viable to valuable. Like, it's the minimal product that adds value in the space. And so when you're focusing on the minimal and the fact that it's a product, you're actually missing the part that will let you cross the chasm, that will get the innovators excited and get the early majority at least looking around and reading your stuff. So that's a super important idea, that when you build this thing, whatever it is, whatever industry it's in, it's pretty simple. Show it to people who might be clients and see if they think it's any good, and ask them, not to reassure you and help you protect your ego, but instead ask them, hey, what's wrong with this? How is it not solving? What problem should it have done instead? Or, a famous one that I like to ask is what's missing here? Like, we know this is totally incomplete. What is missing here in this trial journey demo that we could show you that you'd like to see? And you get a bunch of great ideas that way. So, forgetting the V and MVP, I think is it's almost an epidemic these days. When you're building teams, one of the classic mistakes you'll make in startups, especially in the early days, in the first 5 to 10 people, you will value the friendships and the alignment of personalities over core competencies. And so this is extremely expensive. I've made this mistake too many times to count. You really have to have a sense of who needs to be doing what, right? So Harvard Business School coined this whole idea. They've written about it ad nauseum. So you don't have to go to Harvard to learn this stuff. It's called jobs to be done. And it's a way of thinking about what is the work that has to get done and who are the best people I can find to do that work, who'd want to go on the journey with me. And this is where, Justin Kan, who created Twitch, talks about, and Jonathan Siegel, who is now, who's his co-founder, and he's now the founder of Y Combinator. They talk about the most valuable thing they got out of university was rooming with each other, right? And so there's something to be said for that. Like, the UB innovation engine is just humming beautifully. And I think one thing it really does well is it encourages students to get to know each other. I think Hadar Borden over at UB does a great job of creating this kind of connectivity. And from there, you can look for competencies. And the trick is not to value who would you like to grab a beer with or hang out with or any of the rest of that stuff, but instead value people who think about problems differently than you do and who have different business habits than you do. If you're really punctual and really meticulously organized and find that you can execute any plan you believe in, but you're not so great on a whiteboard generating where the advantages are and the strategy could go, look for somebody like that. They're out there. And so that, I think, is really more important than valuing the friendship itself or the quality of the person's personality. You have to be careful with brilliant jerks, in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of them. We might have one at Circuit, but he's the founder, not a lot we can do about that. But generally speaking, we opt out against that. What we're really looking for are people who are really collaborative, because for us that's really important, and tech adoptive, because that fits the way our company works. So you have to think about your company. You will find that if you're picking your co-founders and building your team by people you like, people who you want to have friendships with, you'll all begin to look very similar. And there's a ton written on this, that teams, especially innovation teams, startup teams, that can be the kiss of death. You actually want people from different perspectives, different diverse backgrounds, different orientation, all of these things. It is the right thing to do. It builds the America we all want to live in, but most importantly, it's one of the remaining few business advantages, right? So if you're strong on culture, if you're strong on inclusion, you actually get different opinions than your your own at the table, and you might actually prevent yourself from making a huge mistake. You have to believe you're capable of making huge mistakes for that to work. And that leads into strategy trumping culture, right? So this is a classic line. There's even a book written, Strategy Eats Culture for Breakfast. I think that's ridiculous. And I think it's also ridiculous, again, in the inverse. Culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. In fact, I would argue, and I think Circuit's pretty good proof of this, we're an Inc. magazine, national best places to work. We're a Fast Company, top 25 best companies for innovators. We believe that culture actually is one of the last few remaining strategic advantages. If you are the kind of company that's really strong on culture, if women can feel like if they came there that they could rise to leadership, you're going to have a recruiting advantage over 51% with 51% of the population. If you're the kind of company that when a person from a diverse background or orientation comes in the door and they see people like them, they don't need to be convinced by you that, oh, you really believe in equal opportunity for everybody, because you've already shown it. And I think that if your policies and your actions reflect the fact that you really are trying to build an amazing company to work in, then you're going to have a recruiting advantage while everybody else in America right now is trying to figure out how to staunch the bleeding. So I can tell you the benefit of putting our time and energy into making our team happy. And we, again, stole this idea from Walmart, right? They famously said, we take care of the team and the team takes care of our customers. We feel sort of the same way. We say we take care of the team and the team takes care of the patients. And in doing that, we create all the value there is for our stakeholders, our health systems, pharma, our CROs, our investors. Everybody's happy if the team does a great job with our patients, creating amazing experiences. That's culture, and it's a strategic advantage. To do that, I believe that you have to be the kind of company that means it. It can't just be values on the wall, although I think values on the wall are great, right? People are like, well, Enron had values on the wall. And I'm like, yeah, the problem wasn't Enron having values on the wall. The problem was Enron committing fraud, right? So you should have a culture and a space that reflects what you believe, and you should be good-natured about adapting it as your team changes over time. And that gets to the next bullet, which I think is another classic startup error, especially for young founders. It's really valuing the vision over your clients, and maybe even I would say over your team as well. Vision's really important. Like, you got to have something you believe, something you want to bring into the world that doesn't exist, but you also have to have the sense that you just don't have all the information. I mean, Google has this great line, right? It's the smartest company in the world. And they say, statistically, the best ideas in the world for Google are outside of Google, meaning that even though there's tens of thousands of people inside Google, there's billions on the planet who aren't in Google. So the next great idea for Google statistically is not likely to be coming from inside Google. And what they focus on is, how do we find those people and bring them into Google or partner with them? I think the same thing's true with your vision. I think founders need to be hard on the vision in its core, in its essence. Like, so the core of Circuit's essence is, we are trying to transform the experience of finding and choosing and participating in clinical trials, because that will accelerate the development of new medicines. That's why I left medicine. And the only good idea I had was that one person can't do it by themselves. It's really about how do you go about building a truly great team of people? But if you did that, you could really be well positioned to do something as ambitious as all that. So that's a pretty simple idea. And then it leaves you a lot of flexibility to bring together great leaders and let them say, if that's what we're trying to accomplish, here are the 55 things we're going to have to do. That's when you start to get pushback from founders, which is that they're like, well, no, I want us to accomplish this vision this way. I can tell you, again, this is only from reading a book a week on companies that have been created and scaled up, and companies that have been created and died. And founders like to write books. I'm sure I'll write one about Circuit someday. So it's all out there. You don't have to take my word for any of this stuff. Just read 20 or 30 of these books, and you'll see there's so many similarities. You should be hard on just the vision and very soft on the journey and very soft on the team, and be listening to your clients, because however you think you're supposed to accomplish the vision, I promise you, you're wrong, and you're wrong in important ways. And the only thing that saves you time and money and gives you a chance to win is other people, right? So Circuit's surrounded by these great mentors, right? Many of them from the Buffalo startup ecosystem, Chuck Lannon, Bill Maggio, right? I mean, there's people around us that have done this 100 times and have done it better than we ever will. And all they're doing with their time is trying to figure out how to make us smarter and faster. They're waiting to help you. People just like that around this ecosystem are waiting to help you. You have to have the humility to ask for that help and to be able to adapt it to whatever it is you're working on. That's the trick of the whole thing. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on raising money. Circuit's not bad at it, but there are some absolutely incredible companies in town who are just mind-blowing at it. So, and there's great founders who are now post-exit who can share ideas on this that have a lot more knowledge. Again, he hates it when I make him famous, but John Yankee is a buddy, and certainly if you can get Andreessen Horowitz's attention, you're doing something pretty incredible. So there are people around this town who know exactly how to play these games at the highest levels. And you should be talking to them. You should be trying to learn from them, no matter where you are in your life cycle. But one rule that every founder I've ever met has to learn this lesson the hard way. But boy, oh boy, did I ever have to learn it the hard way a couple of times, is focusing on things like valuation or worrying about things like dilution when you're doing your early rounds, right? Rather than focusing on how to keep the terms as simple as possible. So I share this with every founder I ever talk to, or whenever I give these kinds of lectures, is really that at the beginning, the most important thing, the thing that best predicts your long-term success with your vision, is how easy are you to mentor? How easy are you to work with? How ambitious is your vision? And can you think about things that are aligned more along the lines of, if you're out to build $1 billion company, trying to take every dollar off the table for yourself on a pre-seed round, those two things don't go hand in hand. The kinds of people who build great companies are the kinds of people who are focused as much on the value for anybody investing in their idea or anybody joining their team as they are on themselves. And so it's easy to say, but I can tell you, having done it wrong and then having gotten better at it over time, it's critical to what growth looks like. So, the last part of this lecture is just a couple of road rules. Again, I really haven't invented any of these things. If you want a book list from me, email me. I'm actually putting one together after giving a talk over at Larry Zielinski's great healthcare entrepreneurship class. But it's really, start with a problem you've ideally had. That's maybe the most important one. If you've experienced the pain, like Circuit is a clinical trials innovation company because I was never the guy at the academic medical center writing those papers. I'm not that kind of doc. I was an operator. I just like to come in early, be helpful, do operations, put pacemakers in, defibrillators, burn out short circuits, go home after it's dark and have a good time and reboot it the next day. But I liked research, and I was lucky enough to be in a group where people liked research as well. And so even though we were a private practice group, we did research. And so I got a chance to continue that through my 10 years of training into Circuit, into my life as a cardiac electrophysiologist. And I saw the pain of just trying to get people into clinical trials, helping people get aware of them, helping them understand it, and helping them choose it. So I've had that problem, and Circuit's built based on everything I learned as a private practice doctor, and somebody who had trained in a really great academic system in Cleveland. So start with a problem you've had, right? Or that firsthand it's a real problem. Paul Graham of Y Combinator famously says, build things people want, right? Like build a product that actually solves a real existing problem. Don't just build something because you are technically great and you've got this kind of neat thing you can make happen in the world with code. That's not a company. That could be a great product, but it may not be a great company. Second part, just as important, is pick your co-founders carefully. I've been very fortunate. Circuit's a team where we've had some amazing human beings on the team. Some are still here, some have left, but good people all the way around. I think that's really important, is picking co-founders for competencies and ethics, I think, are probably the two. So, I put it out there all the time. We've never had a bad actor on the team. Sometimes things work out and sometimes things don't. Sometimes it's the right part of the journey and then it's time to move on. But there can be honorable goodbyes, and there can be these kind of catastrophes. Circuit's never had a catastrophe. Customer discovery, the act of actually showing your stuff early to customers and having them savage it, and you being a good sport about that and actually wanting it, is the key to building something that solves that actual problem we were talking about. And the reward for being in that mindset is you could build $1 billion company if you started that way, if you showed it to people. Some of the 43 North teams that won this year, I had the chance to get to meet a few of them. And it's just, I can't be any clearer on this. They had done so much customer discovery. I was like, these guys are so much better than we were at their stage. They're just so much better. And as a result, their traction is just flying off the table. Like they've got great traction across a bunch of channels. So talking to your customers, Google showed this. The book is Jake Knapp's Sprint, that if you show your product to 5 people, they will identify 80% of what's wrong with it. And if you show it to another 50, that extra 50 people will only identify another 5%. So that's how easy it is to build great products. Identify who you're trying to solve a problem for in very high resolution, get 5 of them together and show them the thing you made, and then just take very close attention to how they struggle through using it, Where do their eyes go on the page? And then interview them afterwards. And do not try to get them to tell you what's good. Try to tell them to tell you what's bad. And you will have solved 80% of your problems with one day's worth of work. Don't quit your day job. This is Buffett's rule, right? If you want to start a startup, my advice to anybody just leaving UB would typically be find a company that has really great sales training. There's a bunch of them in town. Delaware North jumps to mind, but there's a bunch of great ones, Moog. And spend 2 years really learning how to sell, or really learning how to operate, or really learning how to do marketing. And after 2 years of it, you keep a journal the whole time. Again, this is not my idea, this is Buffett's. And within 2 years, you will have the kind of deep expert insight that would allow you to find a business for you to work on. You'd have identified that real problem, and then you could start working on building something that solves that problem. So, Buffett's idea is that if you are started your new job and you're an A player and you get an idea to really transform the world, there's no reason to quit and start from $0 in. You could just be good at your job and work on this problem on the side while you develop those skill sets. So, I like to think that Circuit is housing at least 4 or 5 founders someday, and it gets me excited to think that we can be the kind of team that shows them how to avoid all the mistakes I made in the early days. And that's very rewarding. So you should look for companies like that don't view it as betrayal or the end of the world. If you came and did amazing work for 2 years and then had your own ideas and you wanted to go do your thing, that team would be happy for you. We try to be that company. I see a lot of teams around town that are like that as well. And so that's another part of the mindset. Team is everything. When you're building, it's all about those first 10 people. If you get that right, if you have shared values that you've written down and real goals, and again, on your part as a founder, the mindset should be you are hard on the vision, but just a very narrow 1-sentence version of the vision and soft on everything else. I'll end with one slide on the mindset itself, right? I read a book a week. Everybody who knows me knows what I mean by that is I audible a book a week. I listed about 1.5 speed. I really, I might have made myself functionally illiterate as a result of this. It means that I don't have to make other people's mistakes, right? I just checked my queue before this lecture. I have since so in the last 11 and a half years, I've gone through 868 books. Now, some of those are my kids, but clearly I'm getting a book a week down. And if you are even doing a book a month, you're going to be in great shape. That's 24 books that you would have within your first 2 years as a startup founder. So it's right there. If you're not part of Y Combinator Startup School or accessing those lectures, which are freely available on YouTube, if you don't think those are the best founders in the country doing amazing things and going out of their way to democratize that access, they realize that YC is great, but most people can't go to YC. So they just put YC online to make it available for everyone. It's just sitting there. So if you're not even curious in what Paul Graham and all the rest of those geniuses had figured out while building Airbnb and a bunch of other amazing companies, it's a shame. Because that stuff's right there. So don't make their mistakes, make your own. Keep a journal, write everything down. You'll be really glad to do this, whether you're working in a big company, working in a little company. If you've left school, write stuff down. I keep a journal. It's really useful for not, hey, Bill was mean to me yesterday. What you want to be writing down things is like, here's the problems I'm working on. I'm going to try these 3 things and see how they go. You would be amazed at how valuable that is to look back at a year later, 2 years later. What's critical is to believe something counterintuitive. This is absolutely critical. What I mean by this is that when you're starting out, you want to seem like you are as credible as everybody else and that you're part of the pack. But the pack actually is not where you want to be. The pack has all the advantages. They're well capitalized. They've been at it a while. They have better relationships than you, a better network. Your chance for success in going from 0 to 1, which is the name of Peter Thiel's amazing book on startups, an absolute must read, is that you actually have to look for an idea that people don't have about the space. And it's tough because, you won't know for sure you're right until you get a little traction. But this is where talking to customers comes in. So you have to really have thought about things deeply. That's what I was talking about, where Buffett's advice about spending 2 years learning how to think deeply in corporate America can be really valuable. It lets you learn a market that you think is interesting. He was very specific. He said, pick an industry that you find interesting. You do not have to love it. It does not have to be the passion of your life. You just have to find it interesting. You have to find it kind of, worth reading. It doesn't take any motivation for you to get curious about what's happening in that industry. And then pick the company that's got the best sales program or the best marketing program or the best operational training program, right? And spend 2 years in that model. If you do that, you will be smart enough about that industry to start having counterintuitive ideas, especially if you network and talk to other people and hear what they think about it. Soon you'll begin to develop your own thesis. You can't force any of this stuff. It takes time. It takes time, it takes engagement, it takes reflecting. So it really is about being the kind of person who's open to the next conversation. It's why if any of you throw me an email, I'd be delighted to meet. I may not be all that useful, but I'd be delighted to meet, and I'm learning as I go. There is no such thing as over communication with your team, with your co-founders, with your investors. I think one of the big reasons that people have bet on Circuit, even at times where, our back was right up against the wall in those early days, is because they understood what we were going through in real time, because we shared it with them as transparently as we could. We didn't worry about how do we make ourselves look smart and how do we make ourselves look good. We were more interested in how do we make sure that the people who have trusted us with their investor dollars feel like we are honorable people, and that even if we're not getting it right, we're not going to try to pretend we are, and that they can give us critical feedback, very critical feedback sometimes, and we'll take it in the spirit's intended, that they're trying to help us all build a great company together. So I think the successful founder mindset is humble, not in that sort of fake, like, oh, I'm nothing. If you're brave enough to start a company, you're something. You're exactly what built the engine of American capitalism, which, for my 2 cents, is the greatest engine ever built by any nation of people. So, starting things is putting yourself in a very cool cohort. But it requires the real humility, which is to realize that you're just not good enough by yourself to get anything meaningful accomplished. So it's about who you partner with, who you engage with, who invests in you, who joins your team, how much your clients care about you, how much your team believes that you care about them, all those kinds of things. That's the mindset you want to be in. That's real humility, I think. There are some really brilliant people in town. There really are. If you ever want a list of people who can give great advice, I'll hand it over. But really what you want are people who can give great guidance. I think you have to be careful when you're a young founder, an early stage founder, to seek guidance, not advice. I rarely ask anybody, hey, what should I do? But I might ask them, what do you think are the trade-offs with these various decisions? And how do you think about problems like this? And that's a good way to get an understanding as to how their mind works and how their decision-making works. That's very different than, hey, here's the problem, what should I do? Great founders think for themselves. And most importantly, they are going to be held accountable for being wrong anyway. So you may as well make your own decisions, right? If you're early in the game and somebody's telling you, hey, you need a professional CEO, I can tell you that is, generally speaking, hasn't got a great track record. There's no data that companies that have these sort of, younger founders but get a professional CEO do any better. There are times when it's absolutely the right model. Usually that's actually a little later in the journey. It's actually in the process of scale up. But at founding, the person who's super passionate about this, who works in it while they eat pizza on Sunday nights, is actually the right person to be building that version of the company if they can take feedback. So the trick, I think, is to seek guidance and have the right questions in mind to get guidance, not advice. I'll end with just, the one that startups are a positive sum game, meaning that if you can't build a game where your clients win, your investors win, and your team wins while you win, you're not going to succeed. Like that's the age-old rule of startups. You're going to go build a massively valuable company, have a great liquidity event someday. That's only going to happen if you can learn to think about how to create tremendous value for other people. And if you do that, I can tell you that the value to yourself always gets taken care of. That was true in medicine. It's true in startup land. It's been, sort of universally true for me. So that's where your time is best spent, is how do you create value for your investors? How do you create value for your team? How do you create value for your board that's spending all this time trying to help you get better? And equivalently, how do you create value for clients? I will end on one where I definitely have to follow my own advice in this one. I've started with meditation, but these things, it's a long, hard journey, right? Like the average time from the inception, from founding to liquidity for unicorns is 8.5 years. So if you're under the illusion that 3 years and you'll figure this out, or your projections in 5 years have you at $1 billion, the data is really clear in the United States. And that's primarily, the feeds have been East Coast, Boston, New York, and West Coast, Silicon Valley teams. So those are the best protected, best mentored teams in the world. Average time from founding to $1 billion liquidity is 8.5 years. It's a long game. So, meditate, exercise, eat better than I eat. Who knows? Maybe this is my year. But again, above all, it's a positive sum game. Play accordingly. That's it. Those are the slides. I appreciate the time. I hope this is helpful. If it isn't, it was only 50 minutes.
Super, super helpful. I loved all of it. Definitely appreciate what you were saying. If anybody has questions, I can fill up this time to let you know. But please write them in. I'll give you guys like a couple seconds while I just, you have such a way with words, Irfan. Definitely appreciate it, especially that guidance part where don't look for someone to tell you what to do, but instead to show you how they think. that mentorship part is critical to even how our team is growing as fast as we are. I love everything that you were saying about culture. It's been, amazing in this journey. And I actually hear like a little voice in my head. Our director of ops, Vinko, he's a lot, he's on a different spectrum than I am when it comes to like viewpoints. I'm very optimistic where he'll have like a very, realistic view of it. And then before I even come to him with ideas, I hear his voice and I'm like, maybe I should rethink this. But yeah, if anybody doesn't have any other questions, I will, dive right into it.
I will share it as a while you're getting that queued up. So Circuit's very lucky. We're surrounded by these just brilliant founders who've been there and done that. But I mentioned Bill Maggio, I mentioned Chuck Lannon, one of the founders of Life Storage, right? Our executive chairman is Kerry Hicks, and Kerry and his brother Dave years ago created the company Health Grades, and they took it all the way through its scale up. And that is, my God, Circuit's put a few white hair on my head, which I've carefully dyed black mostly. But Health Grades, absolutely, some just an incredible journey from early success to almost being dead to this massive exit. And 1 in 3 visits that happen in health systems will go through Health Grades pages, whether they know it or not, right? So it's really impactful company. They built something that really mattered to all of us. And Kerry and Dave have these very complementary personalities. They're both amazing human beings. They're both brilliant, but they're brilliant in different complementary ways. And the way Dave would describe it is that, yeah, you remind me of Kerry. Kerry would walk into my office with 12 new ideas, and my job was to get him down to zero new ideas. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Like, that's a great partnership. And if you end up with, he goes, and as a compromise, we'd have 1 new idea. Well, that's manageable.
Oh, yeah, no, that's I really enjoy all of this. So I guess my first question is like, how do you plan your approach to the summit? Like, I know you were talking about looking at what value you can add, but where do you even go? What channels do you use to collect that data?
Yep. So, and it's, I appreciate the callback to that metaphor, right? Like, the good news about climbing Everest is the trail has actually been laid out for you, right? So that's not the hard part. Like, how do you get up the mountain has been laid out now for 75 years. And there's 3 different ways to do it, right? If you can go on if you want to risk life and limb with a super technical climb, you use the Chinese side. If you use the standard route, that's a relatively non-technical climb. So people who want to go on that adventure from all walks of life have gone on that adventure. So the hard part, which I think is absolutely true for Circuit, is right. We're at Camp 1. I literally had this conversation with my team, like, we're about to announce that we've had yet another kind of good experience kind of raising money. We're not ready to kind of get into the details just yet, but it involves partnerships. It's a huge win. It's a great use of a year. Once again, our investors, including the Buffalo startup scene, anyone who thinks you can't raise capital in Buffalo is out of their skull. And I'm happy to sort of share thoughts on that privately, because I think there's some amazing funds here. Tom Quinn, who runs the Impact Fund, Marnie Levine over at Launch New York, Christina Orsi at UB. There are some really motivated, smart people who want to help and make Buffalo amazing. What they want to see are companies that can operate, right? So I told my team, with all these wins this year, we aren't at Camp 4, prepping to walk up the mountain. We're at Camp 1, right? And so that mindset is all about, how do you get your brain to put one foot in front of the other over and over again? So Circuit now has a year where we don't have to raise money. We have all the great partnerships any company would cut their arm off to have the alignments we have. It is about execution and operational delivery, right? And excellence inside the organization. So that's, Bill Maggio has a great line about startups that are trying to scale. And he's the cure for, revenue is people, like the right team, the right leaders who can absolutely deliver operational excellence. And that's true. So, to me, and I think that if you're at the beginning, then it's about storytelling, vision, prove that you can bring co-founders in who are technically solvent, prove that even if you're wrong, it's going to be a good failure. You've got the right mentality, you've got the right opportunity, you've got the right market, you're the right kind of person as a human being. Great. But if you're at where we are, which is, really like we've crossed the chasm and now we're going to scale up, like that's all about, can you bring the right team together and deliver operational excellence? So that's our challenge this year.
That's I definitely like your approach, especially, again, it seems like it's all coming together where just look at what the people around you are up to and then see what you can learn. Appreciate you dropping the names of Alchemy, that book, and Crossing the Chasm. Those are now added to my book list. as far as execution goes, how do you go about planning out your execution? Is it more of like a scope of work that you do first and then proceed, or is it more of a you feel it out type situation?
We just, again, we don't invent anything new. We use Scaling Up is a great book for companies at our stage, right? And it's actually now it's a whole industry is kind of bubbled up out of Scaling Up. So they use the one-page strategic plan, and then we link that to the greatest West Coast CEO of all time was Andy Groves, who created Intel and took it from a memory company into a chip company, and he was really the father of objectives and key results. So we use so John Doerr over at Kleiner Perkins wrote the book Measure What Matters. I mean, so these are just, I always wonder what to say because I never want to be too negative, but I'm like, if you're telling me you've got enough free time that you could start a company, but you're too busy to read the books from the best minds who built companies. These are like institutions, like Andy Grove's High Output Management or John Doerr's Measure What Matters. I never figure out how that works, because I'm like, if it's worth your Sundays and your Saturdays and your late nights to work on your project, part of working on that project is not making mistakes that are already clearly identified, that are so fundamental that when you talk to VCs and they see you making these mistakes, they're like, how is it they're making these well-established, well-known kind of conceptual errors? Like, you guys aren't good enough. We can't fund you, not because we don't like the market or we don't like your product even. We can't fund you because you're not in a learning mode right now. And so so we use objectives and key results. So the entire team has read Measure What Matters. We've been prepping for it for 5 months now. Change management, even in a startup, can take a little time. So we've taken kind of 3 dry runs at it, and now we're ready to kind of spend our next year really being a metrics and key results kind of company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely love the OKR system. It's all this stuff that you're telling me. I'm loving it. Definitely eating it up. I might even ask you to be my mentor later. So I guess we're kind of boiling down to the time. So I'll give everybody a shout out really quick. Thank you again, Irfan Khan. Amazing, Dr. Charisma. This has been really beneficial, and we are so glad that you came and joined us at Buffalo Startup Week. There will be a networking event later today at Pour Tap Room. It's starting at 5. Please head out if you can. If you can't, not a big deal. Thank you again so much, everybody, and we'll see you later.
See you guys. Go Bills.